hello and welcome to the program of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. I'm Winifred Armstrong, and tonight's program, which is only our fourth on Zoom, is about, but one of hundreds we've given, is about the ways a church down 100th Street, where I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, has since the 1960s seized some of the toughest social issues of our time and simultaneously provided sanctuary, outreach, and exemplary action. That's quite a mouthful. And Heidi Neumark, the pastor of that church, Trinity Lutheran, will tell some of its stories in our program tonight. We'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, some I hope from people who have been a part of that history. And I see from the names who are coming, several people who have been part of that history. So I'm delighted to say welcome to old friends and new, and people in New York. There are, of the people I know are here, there's a friend from Oregon who helped found the theater in Trinity in, I think, the 70s and 80s, but she'll speak up at the end. And Michael, would you put up a picture of the church, please? Good. No, of the church. That's Heidi's book. And we'll want to come back to that. Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, there's Trinity Church, built in 1908. Actually, the German congregation that founded the church of German immigrants. That's, Michael, show the next picture if you would.
Yes, give me a second. Sorry.
You see at the moment it's in an empty lot, but I want to show you. I want to show you the empty lot.
Give me one.
Anyway, I'll tell the story, and Michael will find the picture. There we are. That is 90 from 97th to 104th Street, 7 blocks, 37 acres, was cleared in the 1950s of all buildings except Trinity Church, which was literally the last thing standing and was the only thing that was remained. There it is. You can see it with my thing. There's St. Michael's Church at 99th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. So between Amsterdam Avenue and Central Park West, which would be way outside this picture, this is just between Amsterdam and Columbus. Then another set of blocks between 96th and 100th was also cleared between Central Park West and Columbus Avenue. As I said, 37 acres in what was called urban renewal by some, slum clearance by others. They weren't really slums. It was a very large community of people, multiple ethnicities. The old Black community, which lived where I live, and with whom we've been in touch since, lived here, but that's another story. Anyway, Heidi Neumark, the pastor of Trinity Lutheran, that church which was remained and what was built afterward in the late 50s was the New York City Housing Authority built, I think it's now 17 buildings between 100th and 104th Street. And Park West Village was built in this area, 7 buildings between, well, Columbus and Central Park West. Heidi will tell some of the stories of Trinity Church and its history tonight, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. Our website, Michael, thank you, you can find it under Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, or the easiest way is to remember is upperwestsidehistory.org. And you can go to events, which lists the current events. Here's the one today, and there are more coming up I'll tell you about later. And past events, we've been doing programs for 20 years. We have a wonderful blog with a couple of dozen fascinating, fun stories. I recommend it to you for engaging reading. The bookshelf is fun books about this area. And if you have suggestions and ideas for books about about the Upper West Side area, do send them to us. And we can include them either on the bookshelf or in our live resources, which is the library, and other resources that you may want to consult. Um, the specific neighborhood we try to cover is 96th to 110th Central Park West to the Hudson River. But history, of course, spills over borders, and so do we. Our email is bloomingdalehistory@yahoo.com. I think Michael will show that to you in the chat. If you want to get hold of us or send us ideas and thoughts, excellent. This is the program for tonight. This was our flyer. And on this, you see some of the things that I think Heidi will talk about. And if she doesn't, you can ask her. The early engagement with HIV and AIDS, long before when it was untouchable to other people, hosting the arts groups, theater and music. And Chrissy Rocaro is on from Oregon, and she was one of the founders and actors in the group. The neighborhood gentrification, which still goes on, becoming a bilingual Spanish-English instead of German-English, as it had begun. The removal of the historic windows. That's another story we may or may not get to, but it's a fascinating one. The Thanksgiving we mentioned in the early thing, and I think Heidi will talk a bit about that. Anyway, as you see, the church has not been idle. And if you're not on our email list and would like to be, email us at bloomingdalehistory@yahoo.com, or just do it through the website. Now to tell you a bit about Heidi. Heidi was pastor of a church in the South Bronx and a founding member of the community organization group that built the low-cost Nehemiah houses in the area and established a top-ranked public high school before she came to Trinity Lutheran in 2003. Her earlier experiences led to her first book, Breathing Space, A Spiritual Journey in the South Bronx. And Heidi's latest book about her time at Trinity and the difficulties of period being Christian in the wake of Trump, Sanctuary. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the church has been a sanctuary and an activist church, and Heidi will talk more about that. Frankly, it's been an inspiration and a privilege to live in Heidi's neighborhood. Heidi, tell us more.
Thank you so much. Oh dear, now I'm trying to share screen, so you'll have to wait a minute because I'm not on I've lost the Zoom. I've completely lost the Zoom.
We can still see you, Heidi.
Oh, okay, I have it now. Okay, share screen. Okay. I just have to go to present and slide 1. Okay, and I'm off. Thank you so much. This is an opportunity that I'm extremely grateful for, and to share on a subject that's dear to my heart, which is Trinity and this neighborhood and our history together. Trinity has, in fact, been creating sanctuary and social justice, not just since the 1960s, as Wynn mentioned, but since the late 1800s. So, and I find that the very beginnings and the past really helps undergird a vision for the present. So I'm going to begin at that very beginning. The church at first was very briefly located in a storefront on 100th and Manhattan Avenue, but pretty soon there was something happened there, and it moved to a storefront on Amsterdam between 100 and 101st. It was across from what was then the location of the firehouse, which ironically it's now also across the street from the church on 100th Street now. And as I think I've shared at one point with some of you, the firefighters at that time naturally used horses to pull their equipment, and the horses attracted a large number of flies, which made the area less attractive to shop owners, particularly selling different kinds of foodstuffs. And so the storefront directly across from the firehouse was available to the church at the very good price of $48 a month. And our archives have this little gem. This is from the very beginning. Since there was no public school in the whole district and children roamed the streets at all hours, we started a school there. The school was well attended from the start. A man who was our organist was engaged as a teacher. A woman trained as a school teacher, and 2 girls with training in kindergarten instruction were also employed. Soon all the space at our disposal was filled. Now, it wasn't much space. It wasn't likely the best space to be running a school, but it was the only space at the church's disposal. And it was used to create a safe space, one might say a kind of sanctuary for children who supposedly were roaming the streets at all hours. And it was a place that provided the social good of an education, meeting a need that the city, evidently in that what is referred to as the district, Bloomingdale, did not. To me, this moment from our very, very early history describes our reality today in many ways with perfect accuracy. Our space is not as large or updated as we might like. It's not the ideal space for everything that we do, but it is the space at our disposal, and we try to use it as best we can, emphasizing in the midst of gentrification, especially the needs and gifts of those who are most marginalized in our city and our nation. Over the years, it's included a long list of things, more things than I can speak to tonight, more things than I know about, likely. But I'll mention some of the things that really fit our theme for this evening and focus on a few of our present activities and challenges faced by our community and our building. It's important to note that almost everything that we've done successfully has been in collaboration with others in this neighborhood. People who may not be church members, people who may be of differing faiths or no faith at all. But what's mattered is coming together around shared values and concerns. When I came to Trinity, and Wynn mentioned this, I was told a story about Robert Moses when he tore everything down in 27 acres around the church. And I learned that Moses offered $5,000 for church members to move elsewhere, suggesting that the church should go to Westchester, which would thereby clear the path for him to tear down the church building and widen the street. I was also told that the elderly German women of the congregation stood arm in arm in the street, blocking the bulldozers of the behemoth developer. I love that image, but more likely the church avoided destruction at that time because, yes, the stubborn perseverance of the members, but that was joined with the political savvy and connections of the pastor at the time, who was George Saunders, and who had a good friend on the real estate board of New York. And so Trinity remained standing. The 1950s then were also a time of demographic change in the neighborhood. The church was founded by German immigrants. Worship attendance in the 50s started to decline in German and increase in English. And in the 50s already, Trinity welcomed Latino immigrants to Spanish language worship, which ended up being short-lived because the pastor who came from the Bronx to do that retired, and then there was no one to replace him. But that was part of our history. When I arrived in 2003, the congregation wanted to call a pastor who could speak Spanish because they wanted to think about offering Spanish worship again, because there were already ESL classes, English as a second language classes, and an after-school program that attracted numbers of Spanish-speaking children from Spanish-speaking families, and some of whom were asking about worship. So we became a bilingual congregation again, English-Spanish instead of English-German, with the hope of being one community with 2 languages. We also learned from our members and neighbors about unjust and illegal working conditions faced by immigrants in our neighborhood, particularly in restaurants, nail salons, home health care workers. And Trinity joined with other churches and synagogues and student groups and neighbors initially in a Justice Will Be Served campaign that included canvassing businesses and asking owners to sign an agreement to follow labor laws, and then boycotting and picketing restaurants that refused to do that. Immigrant workers then asked if they could meet in our undercroft as a protected space to freely discuss labor violations with organizers and lawyers away from the owners who were cheating them. And we had a this is our undercroft for those who I think it's the first picture of that space. We had a celebrative event there following a legislative win in Albany. And somebody who was there for the first time asked me if our sanctuary was upstairs. And I told him it was upstairs, but I wanted to say, I already considered this space where we already were a sanctuary space. Another way that Trinity served as a sanctuary space came at the height of the AIDS epidemic. When Trinity opened its doors to what was then a fledgling nonprofit, the Upper Room AIDS Ministry, and the board chair of that was the pastor at the time, Pastor John Backey, who is with us tonight. The Upper Room ironically met in our lower room in the undercroft or church basement. And it met 2 days a week with about 40 people living with AIDS who came for case management, meditation groups, massage done by volunteers, a free lunch, and support groups. The program ran at Trinity about 18 months until it moved to a larger space in Harlem. Now, and the fact that we're right next to the health department was an added bonus because many of the clients at the health department, the social workers, came to have lunch with those who were here in the undercroft as a way of getting to build relationships with their clients from the health clinic. The CEO of that organization, Lawrence Pagnoli, said, quote, "Not many churches were willing to open their doors to people living with AIDS. We feared the disease and the people who had contracted it, but Trinity welcomed us with open arms. We were immensely grateful." I mean, at that time, an AIDS diagnosis was basically a death sentence because there were no helpful medications yet. So providing day support helped reduce social isolation, and it helped people manage their disease better and live longer. What's really exciting to me is that those 18 months of sanctuary were a seedbed for something much bigger. The Upper Room is now called Harlem United. Last year, they worked with over 10,000 clients, provided supportive housing for about 1,000 people who were previously without homes, conducted 24,000 medical visits, and provided more than 20,000 hot meals and pantry supplies to low-income New Yorkers. And it was all seated in Trinity's humble undercroft. Some literal seeds were planted around that same time, too. There's a small lot behind the church, which is owned by the Department of Health, but back in the 60s, early 70s, I think, it was abandoned and served as a place for drug users to shoot up. Trinity's pastor asked the health department if the church could take over stewardship of the land and turn it into a garden, and the health department agreed. One of the first things that happened is that, as well, the partner of one member of our church died of AIDS, and the son of another member of the church died of AIDS. And at that time, funeral homes refused to accept their bodies. And so they were cremated, and their ashes, along with a number of other people's ashes, are buried there in the garden. The garden remains all these years later under the church's stewardship, even though it's city land. As you can see, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful flowering green space most of the year that we're happy to share with neighbors. Although our agreement with the health department limits us somewhat because it stipulates that someone from the church has to be present at all times. I'm guessing it's so the church can be held legally responsible if anything goes wrong. But we do try to have it open as much as possible. I'm kind of sad to say that one fun event that we've had in recent years in summer months has been movies under the stars in the garden. But the health department recently installed powerful security lights that run all night, all around the building, including on the garden side. So it's now way too bright. It's as bright as day in the middle of the night. So we can't show any movies or see any stars from the garden. Around the time that the shooting gallery became a garden, Trinity began to host the annual Thanksgiving dinner, which now serves over 1,000 meals. It's one ministry among many over the years and presently of sharing food with hungry neighbors. What I learned is that this annual event began as a meal that rotated around congregations in the neighborhood. And one year, a Trinity member, Sharon Wilson, went to volunteer. I'm going to say something negative, so it's good. I have no idea where she went. But she went to volunteer at a different location and found out that none of the people who came to eat were allowed inside the church, despite the fact that it was pouring rain that Thanksgiving. And when the food was handed out, it was given out on uncovered paper plates. I mean, that's an example, I would say, of closing off a building and refusing sanctuary to those in need, likely out of a misguided desire to protect and preserve a space, as often happens even in religious institutions. But misguided as it was, something amazing happened. Sharon determined that this was not going to keep going on, and she offered Trinity to host the meal with community support, and it's been that way for 40 years. Although the meal moved to Trinity, it's always been a team effort with many neighbors giving money, giving food, and volunteering their time. Recently, we've had a wonderful partnership with Anta Hesed, which is down the street on 100th Street. And they've provided many volunteers to help with the setup and the serving of the meal. Speaking of the fire department, a few years ago, our ovens went out like right when we were about to heat up all the food. And so the fire department across the street stepped in. They gave us their ovens to use as we ferried all the food back and forth. But I have to say that my favorite Thanksgiving story is from this past November, when we thought we weren't going to be able to have it at all because of COVID-19. And the story kind of starts 30 years ago when John Dunleavy was a student at Columbia University, and he volunteered here at the church that Thanksgiving. And it meant so much to him that when he graduated, he continued to come back to volunteer. And when he moved away over the years, he's brought his extended family from New Jersey and Connecticut, and they've all joined in this tradition. In recent years, they've made a huge difference. They brought literally all the turkey. They come really early in the morning and take the first shift in the kitchen and kind of get it set up for everybody else who comes to volunteer later. But this year with COVID, we knew it was not going to be possible to have our regular meal with so many people crowded into the space and into the kitchen. And then John called and said, he and his family were going to be able in their kitchens to provide 300 takeout meals that we could give out in front of the church. And we'd prepare pies and other items. It was much smaller than usual, but it was certainly better than nothing. And I prayed it wasn't going to rain, remembering the disaster of people left out in the rain, but also worried about bringing a crowd of people inside because of the coronavirus. So it fortunately didn't rain. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, John died of a massive heart attack on his 30th wedding anniversary. And his son Ryan called to tell me that, and also to tell me that despite their grief, the family wanted to carry on in honor of John. Only now they were going to be bringing over 1,000 meals. Now this is interesting. John was the mayor of his town, which is Bloomingdale, New Jersey. So here we are at Bloomingdale and Bloomingdale connection. And there was an outpouring of people who wanted to honor him. And the family said, don't bring us food, as often happens at a time of death. John would want the food to go to people who need it most. And of course, it was a lot more food than they could cook at home. They cooked in the school where John's wife, Janet, teaches. They cooked in, at the school, the children decorated all the bags as a surprise for her. They cooked in the fire department, and the fire department in Bloomingdale drove a truck to New York with all the trays of food. And in the end, they brought 1,200 meals and more trays of extra food. And we gave out over 1,000 meals, but there was still more food left over. So I contacted Goddard Riverside, which is about 20 blocks south of us, to see if they could use the food. And at a meal they were doing later in the day. And the woman I spoke with said, it's a miracle. They turned out they didn't get all the food that they were expecting. And they were very anxious about what they were going to do with all the people they were expecting. Because, this was a year when a lot of people needed that food. And then we were able to take the food over there. It was a Thanksgiving for the ages. Well, now I'd like to circle back to our beginning with opening space in that early storefront for youth described as roaming the streets. Because in these days, too, we're acutely aware of young people with nowhere to go, often who've been kicked out literally into the streets by their families, who've rejected them due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. When we were considering a shelter for homeless queer youth, I referred back to our history in that storefront in the late 1800s. It's in our DNA. So Trinity Place Shelter opened in June of 2006, and it's helped around 500 young people, 10 at a time. We offer beds, food, Metro cards, healthcare through collaborations. We have lots of collaborations that include dentists, haircuts, financial help from banks, but most importantly, one-on-one support from our social workers. We welcome young people from all over our city, from all over our country, especially, it turns out, southern states, as well as refugees from Mexico and Central America fleeing for their lives. A recent resident put it like this: I don't feel like I live in a shelter, I live in a home. You can let your guard down here in a way that you absolutely can't do anywhere else. I feel more at home here, more home here than I have anywhere else. Even when I had my own place, renting a room from some cis straight guy, I didn't feel I had the freedom to be myself. We get a lot of freedom here, which is part of why people feel so comfortable. For example, we have a great kitchen where we can cook our own food that's bought for us. We can also shower anytime we want, even in the middle of the night. Things like that make us feel more in control and still free. Laughter is the sound you hear most at Trinity Place, not fighting or yelling. When COVID hit the city last spring, and almost everything that the youth were doing during the day shut down, because it's our undercroft is where the shelter is. It's a shared space and filled with lots of other activities during the day. Except when the city shut down, we shut down all those kinds of activities. So what we did was go from an evening overnight shelter to stay open 24/7. so that there was a safe place for the young people to be. And that was 10 months ago. And that's still how it is. Okay, now for something different, the windows. And the windows for me are an example where history, art, culture, and context clash in a big way. As most of you know, increasing gentrification has brought a lot of construction to our neighborhood. And as part of that, there was excavation activity into the Manhattan schist, the bedrock, a few feet from our century-old building. The developer, wait, what's that? The developer, Trinity, and the church, we each brought in architectural engineers, I think it was a total of 6, who all agreed that our antique stained glass windows would be damaged and should be removed for safety during the work. Trinity agreed to pay for the removal, but not for the return of the windows, which would then require reletting and other work that was quite costly. We could have refused the deal, but we didn't want to have the windows damaged. So the windows were removed. To this day, they were removed in 2007, I should say, which was quite a, it's 2007 is more than 10 years ago. But to this day, people from around the neighborhood just randomly ask me about the windows. Have you gotten the windows back? When are you getting the windows back? The windows have stuck in people's minds as lost history, culture, and art due to heartless developers, all of which is true. And yet I, for one, do not long for the windows return. And I'm going to read a very short, it jumps around a little bit, but a couple of paragraphs from my book. Actually, I'm talking about this window, but it's not the clearest picture, but the children who used to shine with their blonde curls from our church's stained glass windows were all white. The disciples depicted were white. Jesus was white. In every window, every human being was white. When German immigrants proudly placed the windows in their church in 1908, all the children who sat in their presence week after week were also white, often blonde-haired Germans like the children in the glass. It's good that they could see themselves illuminated in the stories, but it's wrong when others cannot. I understand that the German immigrants who arrived here and founded the church had their own struggles. They needed a place to build their own lives and to see their own faces reflected in the sanctuary windows. But no amount of contextual explanation can undo the damaging visceral impact for non-white children of being surrounded by biblical scenes in which everyone, including Jesus, is white. What do those windows mean for the 8-year-old girl? And this is something that happened. The 8-year-old girl ready to jump from the top of a playground slide because a group of classmates derided her as an ugly black monkey. What empowering story might she more easily believe if she had gazed up at black Jesus in the windows or black children sitting at Jesus's feet? What dangerous message do impressionable white children accept when they see the light shining only on themselves? The Washington National Cathedral has removed stained glass windows honoring Confederate Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. In one of Yale University's dining halls, an African-American dishwasher used a broomstick to dislodge and smash a stained glass window that depicted 2 slaves standing in a field with bales of cotton balanced on their heads. I shouldn't have to come to work and see things like that, he said. What about coming to church and seeing nothing but a white Jesus? Is the answer to remove all the windows and lose what many consider priceless art? What about the priceless life of a little girl on top of a slide? I must admit to my own cowardly relief in having that decision taken out of my hands. Personally, I doubt the windows will see the light of day due to the prohibitive cost of reletting and reinstallation over $500,000. And I think it's all for the best. Is it unfair to equate the windows of our churches with the Confederate statues that Trump called, quote, beauty that would greatly be missed and never be able to be comparatively replaced, many will recoil at the comparison, but I think it merits reflection. White Jesus no longer shines through our windows, but white privilege is not so easily dismantled. And the decision of what to do with our inherited visual representations is not usually settled with such ease. Now, this is my perspective. It is, it's certainly not an official position of our church. There are members who share my views. There are members who might not have been thinking about that, but they liked the light that entered the space when the windows came out, because actually the space was much, much darker when the windows were in. There are some who would likely be happy to have the windows return. And there's many people who came since 2007 who've never seen the windows. And yet it's also interesting to me that the absence of the windows also connects to our history. I'm going back to Jesus blessing the children. An art historian told me something really interesting about this window, which looks rather innocuous, but is actually quite revolutionary in its time. In the late 19th century, the Sunday school movement emerged as at the same time that child labor laws and public education ideals for children were starting to take hold. And the Sunday school movement insisted that the church had a role in children's spiritual development other than, be seen but not heard. And Sunday school was also a breakthrough opportunity for women to lead and teach in churches, and it was in English. So many people in many churches resisted these changes, focusing on children, English, women. And so those churches decided not to put in the window of, which was traditional, of Jesus blessing the children, because people might get the wrong idea, and want to do things for children. So congregations that intentionally chose at that time when they were building churches to include this window were openly aligning themselves with the revolutionary Sunday school movement. And in fact, this window was dedicated by the Sunday school. Well, it's hard to see, but I mean, in the biblical story, Jesus' disciples were annoyed by this blessing of children. Behind Jesus' back, there are two backbiting disciples with very disapproving, you can't see it that well, but they have very disapproving expressions on their head. And above their head is kind of coming out a tall building. It was a time of Galilee was under Roman occupation, so I kind of think of it as a Roman tower, colonizing the minds of these men who detest watching Jesus in the act of blessing children, and with them the women. I take it as a kind of early 20th century sign of decolonizing the church, which is work, of course, that's far from over. So in one way, the window's continuing removal is a way that connects to this, to the window's own revolutionary history. But would we have removed them if the excavation had not been going on? I certainly don't think so. And before that happened, let's see. It's also possible, to have alternative art. This is a mural as you enter our Undercroft. It's Martin Luther, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and Frederick Douglass. For those who don't know, the housing, public housing across the street is Frederick Douglass houses. And that's kind of the main mix of groups in our congregation, although not entirely, but white, African-American, and Latinx. And then there's the rainbow. That's a view looking towards the front doors from the front of the church to the back. And I think this is also a time to mention that arts have played and play a huge part in bringing life and joy and hope and insight to our sanctuary and to our work, visual arts, but also all kinds of glorious music, many kinds of music. The sanctuary has beautiful, wonderful acoustics. And then theater, theater both in the undercroft and also upstairs. And that's not been my focus tonight, but I would say the history of arts at Trinity could be the subject of an entire talk in itself. And it's also true that the arts inspire and nourish people for the work that they do, not just as part of the church, but their own callings and passions for making the world a better place in many different ways. Lastly, Trinity's place in the neighborhood connects with a larger global understanding of neighborhood and neighbors. When the New Sanctuary movement, which is a movement in New York, but also around the country, working with immigrant asylum seekers and refugees, they put out a call for clergy to visit the border during a time when there was a lot of hysteria about the invading caravans. And my congregation encouraged me to go. They wanted me to kind of see firsthand part of what was going on and come back to share it here. So I spent 2 weeks at Tijuana and San Diego, port of entry, which is the busiest border crossing between the United States and Mexico. And I volunteered and learned with groups in both of those cities, Tijuana and San Diego. And of course, I saw many miles of wall. When I came back home and shared stories from the border, Trinity worship planners were inspired to bring the reality closer to the congregation's visceral awareness. And so the task was, what they wanted to do was replicate a section of the border wall based on this photograph that I took. And after 2 intensive Saturday sessions with breaks for pizza, we had our wall. Actually, that's half of it. We placed the wall at the entrance of the sanctuary where people would come in for worship or for music and other events, on either side of the central aisle. So basically you couldn't enter the church without passing, without facing the wall. And there was some explanatory material. I won't read all of it, but basically the walls ahead represent the walls on our southern border, a reminder of the many walls that divide us from God and from one another, including in our neighborhood. There's sand in the baptismal font, represents the desert where God's children continue to perish for lack of water and compassion. You're invited to touch the water, etc. So we brought the walls into our sanctuary because we see sanctuary not as a place of retreat, but as a place for deepened resistance and vision and transformation. Now, I don't know if this is true, and maybe somebody listening does know, but I heard that the reason Robert Moses wanted to widen 100th Street, which he couldn't do at Trinity's place because he couldn't tear it down, but did happen down the block from us. He wanted to widen it to keep a bigger distance, a divide between Frederick Douglass houses and Park West Village. I'd like if someone could confirm that. I don't know if it's true. But Trinity has certainly had a very different vision to bring a diversity of people together, to build community and understanding, which I think is more needed than ever. Now, finally, Trinity has faced many challenges over the years, including our skirmish with Robert Moses, but now the Department of Buildings is presenting another serious threat. The first violation we received, which actually isn't this one, the first violation makes sense. As anyone in the neighborhood knows, we have an eyesore, a sidewalk bridge that's been up for years in front of the church. And it's because we need to do repairs to brickwork and our tower area. The sidewalk bridge is there to protect people from any loose pieces that might fall off. These repairs are essential for the stability and strength of the building in the years ahead and the work that having the building allows for. Now, the reason the work has not yet been completed, although it has been, some work has been done, but it's not visible work, but it has been done, is that we need another $1.2 million to do it. But we are in a capital campaign, and with the help of a loan, we should be able to begin work in the spring. But now this violation that you see, the Department of Buildings has returned because someone complained that we have a shelter. Not that it wasn't safe, but that churches don't have a certificate of occupancy to have a shelter. Churches are assembly places, but not residences. Now, to me, this is ridiculous. I think every church or every religious institution that's closed at night should do something for people that are out at night, that have no place to sleep. But the building department does not agree with that. And in order for Trinity to continue to offer a space of sanctuary and shelter, the building department, oh, and you, let me just say, you may wonder, but don't churches have shelters? Well, churches have shelters connected with the city that are very short-term, temporary. And our shelter, the young people, if necessary, can stay up to 18 months. It takes a long, because it's really transitional, so that when they leave, and this has been true for most of our residents, they're not cycling back into homelessness. They have secured housing, particularly for transgender young people who have faced a lot of prejudices in terms of work and housing. It's not a quick process, but the building department says that we can't have it unless we have a new certificate of occupancy. And that requires a lot of changes to our building, particularly in the Undercroft, including full accessibility, which of course we'd like to have, but it's another $700,000 on top of $1.2 million. We're hoping to do what seems impossible and raise the money and stay open. It's a big challenge. If you're a praying person, please pray for us. If you'd like to make a contribution, we'd welcome that as well. But although it's a daunting challenge, our history with capital campaigns is really encouraging. When Pastor Brennicke was installed as Trinity's pastor in 1889, a guest preacher is quoted as saying, "A large field to do good work is before this new congregation, and we feel confident that they will make rapid progress and become a mighty power for good in this city. May their efforts bring fruit." Now, even though Brennicke had only 5 adults and 7 children present for his first service, not a month passed before he presented the little church with a vision to build. Congregants noted that this vision was not shared by all. This is from our archives. We still have a definite recollection of the censure, the ridicule, and contempt poured out over the little congregation because it had risked to undertake a task that seemed entirely beyond its ability. We were a laughingstock, not only to the total unbelievers among the Germans, but members and pastors of old and rich congregations downtown spoke quite indignantly about our foolhardiness. Nonetheless, the congregation grew and began a building fund, and only 3 months after Brennicke's installation, the church purchased our current lot for $12,500, and the rest is, well, history, Bloomingdale history. May Trinity remain a mighty power for good in the city, creating sanctuary and social justice and sharing love and hope for all.
Thank you, Heidi.
God bless. Heidi, can you take a few questions?
Sure, I'm free.
We have about, I'm going to say 10 minutes because I know you have another Zoom meeting.
Well, not until 7, so I'm
Okay, well then let's make it 20.
We have,
Michael will probably, Michael who can see the screen, can go. I know we have, I know we have John Backey, the former pastor, and Chrissy Rocaro, who helped found the theater, have been in the audience. Michael, can you start choosing among the questions and contributions? And
we have John
for maybe 20 minutes.
Got it, got it. So we have John that's talking about activities in the church during World War II or the First World War. Heidi, do you have anything to say about the church's activities back then?
John can John can share something about that if he I've been very curious about during the Second World War, and of course I don't read German, but what was the position of and the experience of a German congregation during the Second World War. And I probably need to have someone who I cannot, when I look through the archives, I don't find even mentions of it, which seems impossible. I probably need to find really give it to, I know German speakers, give them a bunch of the archives from those years and see if they can find something in newsletters that I've missed, because I can't find anything.
Okay. Well, we have John back if he'd be able to speak on that.
Yeah, that was also before my time, but my impression, just from what I inherited, the church did not decline. It continued to be robust through there whenever the outside forces or conditions were. So I think people, in all likelihood, the people in the church were very, what we consider patriotic, and made a point of letting people know we're, if you will, good Germans here. We're not those Germans. So
yeah.
I guess. We have another question from Rocaro, I think, or Chris. The question is, do we know anything about the restoration of the 1908 Hutchins organ?
Could you repeat that? There's a lot of ambient noise if you can't hear well.
All right. Can you speak to the restoration of the 1908 Hutchins organ?
Oh, yes. Well, that's an amazing story. Well, it has been restored at various points. Most recently, there was another organ in the building that on the floor of the sanctuary when I arrived that another organ company was trying to sell. It's a long story I won't go into. But a man named Peter Adrian rang the doorbell of the church wanting to see that organ. And I said, well, that organ's no longer here. It had been sold to a cathedral in Los Angeles. And he said, well, do you have an organ? And I said, we do have an organ, the 1908 Hutchins organ. But he said, could I play it or could I see it? And I said, sure, but it's not working now. So he went up to look at it. Now, this is a complete stranger. And then he comes down from where the organ is and says to me, well, what would you think if I would like to pay to restore it? I mean, he just walked in off the street. I hope someone will walk in off the street tomorrow and say they'd like to restore the rest of the church. And his partner of many years was the head of music for the Episcopal Diocese of New York and had died. And Peter was an organist, and Peter wanted to restore the organ in honor of this man. And he did. And I'm sad to say that Peter died. He lived almost to be 90 years old, and he was in the New Jewish Home and died of COVID-19. But Peter is responsible for the recent restoration of that organ, which we enjoy hearing. It's not our main instrument. Our director of music's main instrument is our baby Steinway piano, but we enjoy hearing the organ. Well, not right now. We're only online for worship, and we're not using the organ for that. But anyway.
We have another question about if you can describe the function of the narrow channel that runs through the basement of Trinity.
Oh, yes, the little river. Well, a lot of, there's a stream that runs through through this area and through a number of buildings. And so in our like, not in the basement, the undercroft, but I guess you'd call it the cellar where our boiler is, there's a little ditch, which had to be made room. And I don't think ours is the only building like that, for this little stream to run through. So yeah, a river runs through it.
And then we see someone asked if they saw some artwork by Angelo Romano in your church, and wanted to know if you had acquired it before or after his death.
Oh, before his death, Angelo came here, and well, he really wanted to use the church. If anyone that knows him, he's like voluminous amounts of artwork. He wanted to use the church as a museum for his artwork. I mean, it wasn't possible for him to take over every space with his artwork, but he gave us artwork, quite a bit of artwork, and he painted some original artworks for the church. So that was before he died.
Okay. I see Jim has his hand up. I don't know if Jim wants to speak or if he had a comment before. Okay. Next is Barbara Ellers. Has a hand up also.
Yeah, I just want to let you know that I'm a native German speaker, and so if there's any need for translation in the German, I'd be happy to help out.
Oh, great. How would we contact you?
I sent my email address.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. We have another question from person. It was they asked that it was their understanding that from their time during the 1980s that the windows were painted rather than stained glass. Maybe John Baggy can speak.
No, that's correct. They are. It's a certain technique. They are painted, but it's hard to explain the technique, and people that see it assume it's stained glass. And I use that phrase myself some of the time because it.
Right, my understanding, stained glass, the colors are in the glass. These are painted on, but the effect is basically the same. They're all leaded glass decorative windows.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. It seems like no one has any other questions.
Peter?
Heidi, is the stained glass Rosette window still behind the plywood?
Yes. Now that's a really interesting and building story that makes no sense. So they put in this beautiful, it's actually a Rosette, but this beautiful window that's behind presently the ugly plywood in front of the church. That was in 1908. The organ was put in 1908. So it's the same year. The organ is positioned with no space. Literally, a human body cannot fit between the organ and that window. So there's no way to access it, to do anything from the inside. What we hope to do, which actually, so you can't see the light coming in from the inside, but it actually looks nice also, unlike a lot, it looks really nice on the outside. So our hope is to take down the plywood and cover it with, a kind of glass that would protect it, so that it would, so you could see it, but it can't really be, I don't think it'll be completely fixed. I don't really know at this point what's happened under the plywood. It's probably not good because it's been covered, if any water gets in there, but in any case, it's still there, yes.
Got it. So do we have any other questions?
Wynn has a question. Wynn has her hand up.
Yeah.
Got it.
I'm not. Peter, you had made a comment when we were talking informally before that I would love to have you amplify and extend during this Q&A period about how, and certainly that I share with you about how, in a sense, the work that the kind of work that the church has done has moved the whole system, shown exemplified what kind of action could be taken when many others were holding back or not understanding the problem or afraid to deal with it. And that is something I have observed in the 50 years I've lived here in this neighborhood. Trinity has seized the issue, but you put it very well when we were talking informally before. Would you speak to that point?
I'll try. As Heidi was saying, the congregation responding to problems has been able to identify problems and try out different solutions, different possible solutions, and just being responsive to the community and being a small organization, they've been able to mobilize and create these programs that then can go on to actually be larger scale solutions. I mean, the shelter is an example of that, that there aren't any other shelters on that scale. Heidi, I don't know if you wanted to say anything further about that, but just in general, that the congregations have been able to step up to the plate because they have people in the neighborhood talking to people and very responsive to issues in the neighborhood, and create programs that are innovative and able to meet needs. And if they aren't meeting needs, change them. So that's one of the things that we were going with. Heidi, go ahead.
May I add a point to that? Some of those programs have started when people were afraid or didn't know what to do. When the AIDS, HIV started, that was an untouchable issue for many people in the public and even in the neighborhood. And Trinity's picking it up and addressing it, as you have pointed out in other conversations, moved on, made it more addressable for not only the neighborhood, but for the city. And you pointed out that, one program moved into the city. Which was that program, if you could remember?
I want to say it was God's Love, We Deliver, that they had started elsewhere. John can probably add on to that, or maybe Heidi could add on to it, but it was delivering meals to people.
God's Love. It wasn't God's Love. It's what we call the Upper Room, and now Harlem United.
That's the AIDS ministry I talked about.
Yeah. God's Love was a bunch of blocks south.
Well, and your shelter has also, for the LGBTQ people, has also made it something that when people were either uncertain or afraid.
Well, I would say two things in this congregation, because one of the thing that kind of got the shelter going was a call for churches one winter, the winter of 2005, churches to just take a week or in the coldest part of the year in February, late January, just churches or synagogues around the city take 1 week to shelter 7 young people, and this organization was going to provide cots, and the institutions, the churches, their synagogues would provide meals and presents there. And there were only 3 churches in the whole city was asked that did this. And I think, Trinity, maybe foolishly, I mean, as it said, like we were blamed for being foolhardy, but has been willing to take risks. It is a risk, if it is a risk to do many of these things. And but if and also Trinity's been rather nimble without layers and layers and layers of administrative overhead, so able to make decisions relatively quickly. I mean, in some churches, by the time they decided that they would take homeless young people in for a week, the winter would have passed. I mean, I mean, there's a negative side of that. You know, we don't have a lot of administrative, you know, we don't have a church secretary, for instance. But in any case, I think those are two qualities that have served Trinity really well. Being
Me
willing
too.
to take risks and being nimble in decision making.
A few more comments is one, we have a volunteer from the 80s, Chris Rocaro, who volunteered at the summer school and also after school tutoring. It was mainly for children in the neighborhood, and also they were well known for rummage sales, who were spearheaded by Sharon.
Oh,
Someone in the
great.
chat wanted to ask if you, Heidi, and John Backey can talk about Timmy and his role in the living in the food in the community.
Talk about Timmy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe John could. Timmy was not, I don't know if he died or he was no longer here when I came. I never met Timmy. I only heard about him by reputation.
There used to be a pizza place on 103rd and Broadway, I think it was, that was run by a meditation group. And Timmy worked there. And I came in one day in my collar and we started talking. And he'd been making spaghetti and serving it out of the pizza place. He needed a place to cook. And as Heidi said, being nimble, I didn't have to clear a lot of board approval. I said, come on over. And twice a week, one day, Tuesdays, he would cook this huge pot of spaghetti, and the other day he would do soup. He'd give it out on the street corner. And the two things I learned from him, the reporter said to him, don't you think people are going to take advantage of this? And he said, I'm giving away food for free on a street corner. I don't know how you take advantage of that. And then when he said to the reporter, is that something you would do? And sort of embarrassed the reporter. Until just before he left, or I left in 84, I didn't know his last name. We called him Timmy Spaghetti. And I learned he was a couple of credits short of an MBA. Very insightful, sharp guy. My understanding was he moved to Haiti at first. I don't know where he's come back to. We lost track. He's often.
I heard that he died.
Okay, that would be too bad.
Yeah.
Michael, I'm going to, because I know we're getting short on time here. Christy, I wanted Christy Rocaro, who I think is still here, to tell us just a minute or two about the theater that they had. Christy, are you there? And can you tell us a little bit about how the theater got formed and what you aimed to do with it and what you did do with it?
Yes, thank you. In the early 1980s, we moved into the neighborhood, and at some point they, gosh, my memory is full of holes, but they wanted choir members, and they decided that they would just have choir on Sunday mornings and give everybody bagels, and not have a weekly choir rehearsal, so that the actors who lived in the area could be in the choir. And I think from that point, the actors who were in the choir got involved, and it was kind of a cross-pollination with some others who were looking for a space to put shows on. And they started a theater company that was allowed to work in the basement. And I know I was in a couple of shows down there. I did a cabaret show there with my friend Richard Storm, and we did the Christmas Carol 2 or 3 years in a row, I think. That went on for quite some time, a musical version of the Christmas Carol. And it actually, it went on for quite a number of years.
And you did some good shows.
We did some darn good
In
shows.
the audience.
I put in the chat that I don't know if Heidi is aware that, and John Backey can speak to this as well. In the 80s, when we were trying to do some kind of capital campaign to fix the tower, which was always a problem, and still is, I'm sure, The big boys in the Lutheran Church actually told us that they thought we ought to tear the building down and put up a prefab building because it wasn't sustainable to have that large church building there, and we demurred.
Right.
Well, I can say, I mean, whether it's sustainable or not, we'll see, because the work that has to be done now on the, even if we didn't have the shelter, because we couldn't do that work, which I certainly don't want to see happen in any way, shape, or form. But the work that has to be done on the tower area and the facade, if it isn't done by next winter, pretty much you can kiss the building goodbye. It has to be done. It's not a question of delayed maintenance anymore. The damage would be too great. It can't really withstand it, another winter after the next. So we have to do that work. And our national church does not have any money to contribute to it. So we'll see. We'll see if it's sustainable or not. I wanted to respond to a question that I see from Hannah Griggs. I don't know if Hannah's still here. Hannah, are you still here?
Yeah, I'd be able to hear him.
She says yes. She says
okay.
yes.
All right. She asked, did you receive criticism from the congregation for speaking out against the border wall Trump? If so, how did you handle it? Actually, that is one way our congregation is not diverse. I mean, there is not I not only didn't receive criticism, it's what the congregation expects and wants. There's no Trump supporter at the church. That is not a kind of diversity that we have at all. I don't think there's a Republican at the church. It's not what's called a purple church, red and blue. No, it's not. Certainly there's diversity in terms of political opinion and, who's more liberal, who's more radical, who's more to the left and who's less to the left. How are things, how people view things. But no, nobody would be critical of speaking out against the border wall and Trump.
Heidi, I would like Michael to put up again the picture of your book, and Michael, would you put that up and note that it can be ordered anywhere, but Heidi has particularly mentioned ordering it from
bookshop.org, because they give a portion of every book that's sold, a portion of the money to independent bookstores, and you can choose what independent bookstore you want your purchase to support
or not. Yeah. Or if you don't have to, they will decide if you don't.
Or they'll look at your zip code and find the closest one.
Thank you, Michael, for putting that up. I'm going to use that note just to say thank you immensely for this. Obviously, this is a continuing history, and you're not just telling the history, you're making the history. And if you missed any of this, or you want to recommend it to friends or hear it again, it will be tomorrow and into perpetuity on our website, upperwestsidehistory.org. And I think there will be a link to it on your website too at Trinity. Am I right, Heidi?
Yes.
Okay. I also want to mention that our next programs will be February 16th on local histories by first-time authors, one of them being our own member, Jim Mackin, on notables in the Upper West Side, and the other speaker being Matthew Spady, who has written sorry, I'm reaching for my notes here. Anyway, a surrounding area. Sorry, I haven't got it right in front of me. And on March 16th, we will have a program called Posh Portals, about some of the elegant doorways on the Upper West Side and in the city by Andrew Alpern will be the speaker. And the preliminary stuff is really fun. Thank you all very much for coming. Stay well. Hope to see you soon.
It's a treat to see you, Win.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you for everyone who came, and thank you.